Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Julia here from Juris Education. We've got a really exciting webinar for you all about advanced LSAT test prep strategies. I know many of you will probably be preparing to write your tests very soon or maybe in the near future. So I hope you'll get a lot out of this webinar where it's chock full of super important information that you'll need to really get a high score on your LSAT. Before we get started, I just have a couple housekeeping things that I want to get in order for you guys, and then we'll go ahead and introduce our lovely panelists and then get the show rolling. Just to go over what we're going to be talking about, for our overview, we'll be touching on effective study techniques for the LSAT, tips for tackling each section of the test, strategies to improve your timing and your accuracy. And then at the end, we'll have a specific Q&A. So if you have a question throughout this webinar, I'd ask that you hang on to it until we get to the Q&A section. And then if you type your question in the chat box, our two panelists will really be there and answer your questions and give you guidance when that time comes. I also want to flag that this webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out to all participants tomorrow. So if you want to go back and watch again, or if you missed something, you will have that opportunity when we send it out tomorrow. Okay, just to go over a little bit of Juris Education, if you hadn't heard of us before, here's my opportunity to give a little spiel. We're a globally recognized law school admissions consulting firm, and we offer comprehensive support from test preparations to law school admissions and even bar exam tutoring. With a 94% acceptance rate, our students gain entry into the top law schools in the US. Last cycle alone, our T14 acceptance rate was 34%, which is almost 6 times higher than the national average of 5.7%. At Juris, we believe in starting the law school application process as early as possible. So for college sophomores, we offer pre-law advising and profile development, which focuses on building each student's professional cover letter and resume to highlight the most meaningful experiences and elevate the profile. To help them stand out, we assist in enhancing transcripts and GPA, identifying organizations and internships, creating a timeline for LSAT and application preparation, and pinpointing specific areas of interest. Our goal is to help students gain a strong foundation and understand what these law schools are looking for while building a portfolio that sets them apart from other applicants. While our counselors support students in building their profiles, our LSAT coaches work closely and tirelessly with them to provide personalized one-on-one tutoring. Students who take an official LSAT diagnostic test will have tutors assess their strengths and their weaknesses. This really helps create a custom study plan structured for the days, weeks, and months ahead, depending on when you start studying for your LSAT. We tailor our approach to each student's unique needs and schedule, providing the right assignments and lessons as they become familiar with the test content, strategies, and format. Interim tests monitor and track progress, allow us to modify study plans, and build an upward trend leading to the official test date. On average, we see a 12-point increase for 45+ hours of tutoring and offer a 165+ LSAT score guarantee within our 60-hour program. Once we've helped shape an outstanding candidate, we support creating the perfect application. Law schools review applications holistically nowadays, and we assist with every step of the process. Our support starts with a detailed profile analysis, diving deep into student stats and experiences. This guides the creation of a well-balanced list of target, safety, and reach schools. We also help build strong resumes and obtain a letter of recommendation from the right recommenders. Our services continue through the interview process and include waitlist strategy support and scholarship assistance until students receive their acceptances. Our admissions counselors, who are also essay writing experts, will brainstorm, outline, and edit your supplemental essay and personal statements until they're perfect. These essays showcase the best aspect of our students, and they're incredibly important. So they'll connect your life journeys with the themes of every school that they apply to. Whether it's for your main application or scholarship essays, we will offer unlimited edits. Super important. Overall, just to sum this all up, our goal is to build the perfect candidate and application for these law schools. We use every tool in our skill set to ensure the products we create and our students stand out from the rest. If you're interested in learning more about us and our packages, we offer personalized free consultations via video, phone, or email, and our admission counselors are ready and willing to help you throughout the process, so you don't have to navigate it alone, no matter where you are in the process. Okay, now that we've kind of got an idea of what Juris really is, let's go back to our webinar. Okay, give me 1 second here. Okay, let's go ahead and meet our panelists. I'm just going to get you both to introduce yourself. Madeline, we'll start with you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Madeline. I tutor for the LSAT. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and I went to college also in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown. After I graduated Georgetown, I actually had a baby. So I have two little kids. My daughter is 6 and my son turns 3 on Monday. So super exciting around here. But I always joke I'm stay-at-home mom by day and LSAT ninja by evenings and weekends. So I took the LSAT in 2020 and I scored 173. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks so much. Tamar, how about you?
Hi guys, my name is Tamar. I use she, her pronouns. I am the total opposite of Madeline, so I am so glad that we get to present together. I went to undergrad at Vandy, was an English major, had no interest in going to law school, and ended up applying. Went to University of Michigan for law school, hated studying for the LSAT, was not my jam. Still don't like thinking about all of the hours I spent studying for the LSAT. And after practicing for 3 years, I am now a law school professor. So you get to hear from folks who have very, very different experiences with LSAT things and come from 2 totally different backgrounds on it. But I think that is kind of the strength of a presentation like this, because you can totally hate the LSAT can totally be your jam, and kind of everything in between. And there are candidates like that all the time that Madeline and I both get to work with. And all of you can get into law school and be really successful. And that's really great. So we're excited to be here today.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Tamar. I think, Madeline, for the next slide, once we jump into the content, I'll get you to do the first slide, and then Tamar, maybe I'll get you to do the second, and we can just like kind of go back and forth. Cool. All right, let's get started.
Right. So perfect. We'll just jump right away into some overall study techniques for the LSAT. So first one we have here, active learning, probably the most important, right? So, you know, the LSAT is not a passive exam. It is not one that you can just sort of chill and like coast through and kind of wing it. Some people do that. It's not very successful typically. So it's really important that, of course, you're taking studying seriously, engaging with the material, most importantly, the practice tests. Super important that you are reviewing those practice tests, or any practice that you do, even when you're just starting out. I think something that holds people back often from improving on the exam is just going through the motions and not really taking that time to dial in on what those weak spots are, learning from each and every question that you do just to get a little bit better every single time. This is super corny, but I've been watching Olympics like all week, and every single time any athlete wins anything, they're always emphasizing, or you hear sort of these anecdotes on how consistent these athletes are with their training and how they just show up each and every day and work to get a little bit better. And I was watching the gymnastics today, and I sort of joke, LSAT's like mental gymnastics. So to do a little bit every single day, just continuing to show up and get stronger. And again, really engaging with those practice tests, doing practice tests consistently, really trying to mimic that exam context, right? Doing those full tests, trying to make sure you're prioritizing a quiet environment, just honoring the integrity of that exam, not, kind of getting up, walking around, being distracted when you're doing it. That's all going to hinder you from improving. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, reviewing mistakes. Here, spaced repetition. I'm not entirely sure what this term is referring to here. Looking at it as spreading your study sessions over time to enhance retention. I'm interpreting this to mean that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So when you're studying for the exam, it's not super productive to try to have these like I said the marathon study sessions, but really these long, intense study sessions where you're going to see those diminishing returns in terms of your focus and attention. So really, again, goes back to that consistency, showing up, even if it's just a little bit every single day. Or a great thing is to take breaks. I find that most people, with the exception of when you're doing like a full-time practice test, around an hour and a half, 2 hours max is really, you don't really need to typically push much further than that per day. And of course, continuing to go back and review those, again, previous, whatever whether it's practice tasks, practice sections, drills, whatever it is you're working on, being consistent with it and making sure you are thoroughly reviewing it.
I get the short and sweet slide. You'll want to do varied practice, right? So you don't want to keep harping on kind of the same types of questions. I have a tendency to do this when I'm studying things that I get stressed about. I like to pick my favorite types of questions that I'm the best at and then just like focus on those as if that's going to help me get better at the questions that I'm not so good at. And obviously that's not what's going to work here. You want to expose yourself to the variety, right? You don't want to be caught off guard on the day of because you're like, oh, I didn't think this type of question would show up, or like I didn't, like I really focused on this thing instead of this thing. Make sure you're exposing yourself to a wide variety of examples. I also do think that it's important to expose yourself to different study materials. And I don't know that that's so much because I think part of it is just because studying for the LSAT to me felt very different than studying for lots of other things. And so it took a second for me to figure out like, okay, am I a group learner when I'm studying for the LSAT? Am I a one-on-one tutor person studying for the LSAT? Do I do flashcards? Do I do practice examples all the time? Do I, read the material and then reread the same material a few weeks later to see how well it sunk in? There's lots of different effective ways to study for the LSAT. And, it's definitely not a one size fits all. This is also true about law school. So like, it's good to just figure out what works for you. Try something. If it doesn't work for you, that's okay. Try something else. That doesn't mean that you can't do better, that, like, oh, my friend did use this method and that's like the best method and the only method. Like that's not true. So just make sure that if something's not working, don't like square peg, round hole, like don't keep shoving. Find a new way to make yourself successful.
All right. So we'll talk about the importance of having a plan, having a set schedule. As Tamara was just saying, right, there is not necessarily a one size fits all. So for, someone's study schedule is not going to look identical to someone else's study schedule, especially because most people have different things that they juggle in their day-to-day life. Everyone's lives and schedules look different, but just, having different plans doesn't mean having no plan, right? So I always recommend to people, especially if you're at the beginning of, the studying for the LSAT, really take a moment to reflect on, what does your life look like? What are your responsibilities? What is your schedule on a day-to-day look like? And how can you best adjust studying to your life? It's really hard to just magically create like new habits overnight. And I think a lot of people sort of think like, oh, I'm just going to completely overhaul everything about myself and how I've ever done everything ever. And it doesn't work that way, right? We want to make it sustainable and we want to meet, or we want the exam to sort of meet us where we're at. And so I always recommend to people, whatever your timeline is and how can you make your schedule and your plan be something sustainable that you will continue to show up and be consistent every single day. Whether, again, that's going to be over, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year. And again, everyone is different in terms of how long they take to study for the exam, but definitely important to have a plan and be organized. I sort of joke that, in most aspects of my life, I'm pretty like I'll say B+ here. I'm not like the most like type A person, except when I was studying for the LSAT, I was a lot more organized than I typically tend to be. And, it was helpful to, again, just keep track of my progress to make sure I was staying consistent. And it can be very helpful in terms of confidence for the exam to really track your progress and to see yourself show up each and every day and witness yourself doing that. It, I think, does a lot sort of mentally with being really confident and prepared to go into the test.
Okay, so I think the next few slides are all schedule examples. So we will kind of, I think, breeze through them, but this is a 1 month study plan schedule. I will emphasize again, there is no one size fits all. I will say candidly, I don't know anyone who studied for only a month. So I think the person that I admire deeply, who I know studied her butt off and I think ended up with a perfect score on the LSAT, studied for 2.5 years. So it is a test that is studyable. Not everyone has 2.5 years. If you only have a month, here is a sample schedule that might work for you. But you have to do what works for you. And if that means you're working full-time while you're studying, you're working part-time while studying, you're studying, when you have like a break from, I don't know, undergrad, whatever's going on, make a study schedule that works for you. So this one, for a 1 month, week 1, you're taking your diagnostic exam, which is usually how most folks start studying, reading through your prep books, possibly if you have a program that you're following, and reviewing your notes, consistently reviewing your notes, right? Week 2, focusing on practicing analytical reasoning questions, timed and untimed. I will say timing is important. If you had more time on the LSAT, I'm sure all of us would have picked up extra points. So making sure that you're getting used to building that habit around timing is important. Week 3, focus on practicing logical reasoning questions, reading comprehension questions, timed and untimed again. And then, of course, you're reviewing all of the answers, seeing what you're getting wrong, things that you're getting right, understanding the reasoning behind them. And then week 4, honing on any weaknesses, completing 2 full-length practice tests every day under 10 conditions. So again, this is a pretty intensive schedule if you're trying to follow with only 1 month to study.
All right, so this is a 3-month schedule, and I would agree with you, Tamara. I think 1 month is probably not the reality for most people. I don't think it necessarily should be. I find, just again, from having worked with many students, I would say most, or I don't know, like a soft most, we'll say, tend to dedicate around 3 to 6 months for the exam. I find that tends to be the sweet spot. But again, some people are less, many people are more. So again, just it is not one size fits all by any means. So it looks here pretty similar, assessing your baseline via diagnostic, again, reviewing prep books, etc. Notice it's very similar to the 1 month, just sort of spread out over time. Instead of doing, I think the biggest difference is the 1 month had a phase of doing 2 tests a day, which is probably, difficult to sustain for many people. This schedule is aiming for a few a week. That's personally what I did in my own study schedule. I was kind of weird. I studied for like a month and a half and then just stopped for 6 months, and then had like a 3.5 month more intensive period of studying where I was doing around 2 to 3 tests a week. Something I noticed on the other page, I just want to mention, it mentioned analytical reasoning, which is no longer on the LSAT anymore. Or the logic games, as they're sometimes called. Now it's just logical reasoning and reading comprehension. But the sentiment still remains. We still have to study, so it's really not functionally that different.
Okay, and the 6-month study schedule, I think is, like Madeline was saying, is very common. Lots of folks take 6 months. Some people, tons of folks take more than that, which is totally fine. So month 1, you're assessing your baseline again. That's something that you've obviously, of course, seen consistently as the starting point for everyone. You're trying to understand kind of where you are for reading, your logical reasoning, all of that stuff, making notes on your prep books to make sure you're learning the theory. Month 2, you're reading and reviewing the notes you made from your prep book and completing possibly another one. I don't think that has to be the case. There are some folks who like bouncing around between prep companies, if that's what you're using. Some folks really stick with one. I stuck with one and used mine for probably 6 months. So I don't think that's necessary, but that is an option if you feel like, again, you don't have to stick with something if it's not working for you. If you tried one prep company and you're like, this is not working for me, switch. There is nothing worse than like trying to stick with something that is clearly not working for you, just because you feel like you have to. You definitely don't. So feel free to kind of take what you can from each of them, and mix it up if you want to. Month 3, untimed practice questions, finding your strengths and weaknesses, really starting to hone in on what some of those weaknesses are, doubling down on some of those sorts of things. Month 4, sorry, I'll just finish this one out. Month 4, mastering your strategy for the strong sections, and still we're keeping with the time and untimed thing. Month 5, you're really honing in on those weaknesses, trying to get those numbers up. Hopefully, of course, you won't match your strong ones with your weak ones necessarily, but really trying to get those numbers up, time and untimed. Reviewing, I feel like that's really the name of the game, reviewing the questions that you're having difficulty with, understanding what your pitfalls are, why you're getting those same things wrong, making sure you're like able to catch them in future rounds. Some people actually like reviewing questions that they had gotten wrong like weeks and weeks later, so that they can make sure that their brain is like not falling into the same patterns again, and that they can catch their mistakes when they're maybe not as fresh in their minds, but they're still able to make sure that they're like correcting their path, if that makes sense. 2 to 3 full practice tests during the last week of month 5. And then month 6, focusing on completing 2 to 3 full-time practice tests under LSAT test conditions each week, and just really solidifying what you're doing and your strategy.
All right, so now we'll get a little bit more into the actual content of the exam. So there are 2 types of sections on the LSAT. We have a reading comprehension section, and then we have what's known as, it's called logical reasoning. This is a section that really emphasizes the idea of arguments, understanding what an argument is, being able to comprehend an argument and analyze the argument and pick apart the argument and attack the argument, everything about the argument. So again, test your ability to analyze, evaluate, and complete arguments. Sometimes people will sometimes refer to it as the argument section. I've heard this sometimes. And again, it requires a variety of questions that are, testing not only your comprehension, but your ability to think critically about the argument and analyze it. There are a variety of different questions that they will ask in logical reasoning. They don't just ask whatever they feel like it. There's sort of a prescribed set of questions or types of questions. At the same time, these different types of questions really exist more on a spectrum than in a vacuum. Most of the questions in logical reasoning really are dealing with the central theme of what is our argument expressing, and is it good or bad? How can we analyze that? How can we attack that?
I'm just going to piggyback right off of what you're saying. So strategies, understanding question types, make sure you're really familiar with what the common question types are. There are not an infinite number of question types, right? Like the LSAT is a super learnable test. They have kind of a set number of ways that they'll ask things. They have kind of their favorite ways of doing things. Those are all things you can learn. So familiarizing yourself with what those common question types are, assumptions, strength and weaken, inference questions, thinking about what the specific type of approach you should be using to answer specific types of questions effectively. Then breaking down arguments, practice breaking down arguments into their components. So that's conclusion, evidence, assumptions. Understanding the structure of arguments helps to just identify what the weaknesses are and logical flaws. So kind of looking at the forest for the trees is just a helpful way to start understanding to break down the arguments, right? And then just lots of practice. There's nothing will help more than practicing, unfortunately. It feels like ripping off the Band-Aid. Like, I'll just keep reading.
It really is so important, though.
It's just like, you got to do it. And instead, I feel like sometimes my brain is, sorry, I just finished taking another bar, and my brain was constantly like, I'll just read about taking the test instead of like actually making myself take a practice test. And it's like, no, there is nothing that is better than just sitting your butt down and doing a practice test. So that is also unfortunately true here. You just got to keep practicing.
And then the other section is the reading comprehension section. I think many people find this section to be a little bit more straightforward. That doesn't mean easy by any means. In fact, I think it actually can be deceivingly challenging for many people. But in terms of like the structure and what sort of they're asking us in reading comprehension, I think it's relatively intuitive. Most standardized tests have some form of reading comprehension, SAT, ACT. standardized test they make you take in the 4th grade. Like it's the same thing. It just gets harder as you go along. The LSAT just a really difficult version of it, but it's essentially testing our ability to read a dense piece of information quickly and understand exactly what's being said. And in reading comprehension on the LSAT, we have 4 passages that we read in a given section, and each passage has about 5 to 8 questions that follow it. So again, it analyzes our ability to read complex text, often dense. They're from a variety of topics, all nonfiction, but there's passages, you know, that are science, law, humanities, arts. Some of it's actually pretty interesting. And some of it's not, but, you know, we go in with the mindset that it is interesting, because then it magically becomes more interesting. Okay. And again, various topics, as I mentioned, law, sciences, both sort of applied natural sciences or more social sciences as well. So yeah, big variety.
So some strategies that will not surprise you, because a lot of these are similar. Active reading techniques, right? Which is something that you will be doing for all testing that you do now and in the future, and you've probably done in the past to get yourself this far in life anyway. Active reading is just so important. Half of the game is making sure you know what question is being asked, making sure that you haven't missed key details. You can sometimes eliminate really easy answers because if you didn't misread, you will have caught things, right? So just make sure that you're engaging the text, circling things, summarizing in your head as you read. Annotation just helps a ton. Whatever, you know, if you can build an annotation strategy that works for you, you circle certain types of things, you underline certain types of things, you star certain types of things. Those can be just like quick and easy ways to get your brain to do that faster. Main ideas and author's tone, focus on grasping the primary message, the attitude from the author. Sometimes you can look at really specific diction to help you understand what those things are, to clue you into those things. Recognizing the main ideas and tone are just overall helpful, but help answer the questions really effectively and accurately. And then efficient testing really is reading questions before the passage to know what to look for. This is actually something that they tell you to do in law school. This is something that they tell you to do for the bar exam. Just really common, instead of just kind of like reading. You're not like reading for pleasure, unfortunately. This is not like, let me meander along and see how the story goes. So it's really helpful to help kind of focus your mind. And it can save you time. So your brain is just more focused on what you need to be looking for, because really you're looking for specific things. You're not there to enjoy it and then figure out what you were looking for along the way. If you can cut some of the time in between those two steps, then you'll be ahead of the game.
Amazing. Thanks so much. So we've reached halfway through our presentation, if you can believe it. I feel like time is flying by. And it's my opportunity to now do our midway check-in. We can all take a breath, maybe take a stretch. I know there's been a lot of information coming our way. But I'm going to use this opportunity while you guys are taking a little rest to remind you that as an attendee of this webinar, you actually are eligible for 10% off of a consultation with Juris Education. So make sure you use that to your advantage, and make sure you book a consultation with any of our lovely panelists or any of our coaches that are here to help you. Like I mentioned, because I've seen some questions in the chat, this webinar will be recorded and sent out. So if you don't screenshot or scan the QR code right away, you can take a look when we send this back to you and then take note of that. Okay, on to our regular scheduled programming.
All right, this seems to just be a suggestion here for some additional resources that have some sources for sample questions. There's a lot of places that you can find materials specifically for preparing for the LSAT. There's a lot of great free stuff out there. Again, like this sample question quiz. There's a lot of great YouTube stuff too. If you guys are not familiar with Law Hub through the LSAC or LSAC, that's their big girl name, but I just call them LSAC. That is their practice test platform. There's two versions. There's like a free version and a paid version. The paid version just gives you more tests, but the free version is pretty great too. There's 4 free exams. It's a great place to do a diagnostic. They have a lot of drill sets and like curriculum materials too. So if you have an account with the LSAC, LSAC, you have an account automatically with Law Hub. So that's a really, really great resource too.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to talk about the writing sample, and I am going to give maybe a kind of hot take and say that I was always taught that the writing sample is not that big of a deal. I don't know very many people who ever in admissions who have talked about looking at a writing sample. I sometimes have heard rumblings about it really just being a thing where they need to like verify identity, which makes me start to sound a little like hocus pocusy, and so I won't go down that rabbit hole too much. But all this to say, I think that the bulk of your time should be spent on studying for the multiple choice. I would not spend a tremendous amount of time on the writing section because I have never heard of it being useful for admissions in any sort of way. With that caveat, tips for tackling the writing sample. It's an unscored section. It requires you to write an essay in response to a prompt. Schools can review it to assess your writing and your argumentative skills. Again, I have never once heard of anyone in admissions ever doing this at any schools, but they can. It is possible. So you should not do it. Don't not do it. I don't think it's an option to not do.
And yeah, just some strategies for actually creating the essay. You know, if you are currently in undergrad or have been in any sort of, you know, higher education recently, this is not going to be a huge departure from maybe a lot of the writing that you've had to do for your coursework, unless you're like a math major. That's maybe different. Props to you for you know, being interested in law school. Sort of a side note, I feel like math people sometimes have ironically like the easiest time with the LSAT because it's very logic oriented. But anyway, we won't go down that rabbit hole. As Tamar said, like, again, schools aren't really like in the weeds with the essays or the writing sample. At the same time, though, you don't want to just like not like goof off and write like silly song lyrics. So you want to take it seriously or seriously enough and put your best foot forward with it, right? And so I personally would think the most important thing is just making sure it's very clearly structured, cohesive, concise, and presenting just clear text, clear written English that is, again, decently organized, well structured. Typically, I find 4 to 5 paragraphs will do the trick. Solid intro, couple bodies, paragraphs, and a tidy conclusion. Again, just making it really clear. I think the most important thing with the writing sample, they've slightly changed the prompt like just recently, but it's still very similar. It's an argumentative essay. So it's really important that whatever you're arguing, you stick with it. We're not just splitting the difference or, doing, half and half this, half that. You want to have a clear argument and stand by your position, find evidence to support it. And you also wanted to defend that argument as well. Just like the standard exam, the time for the sample is 35 minutes. That is the standard time. That is not if you have extra time accommodations, but at 35 minutes, they've now just added a 15-minute prep portion as well. This is new. It literally started like July 31st. So like literally very, very fresh. So if you take the LSAT writing now moving forward, you will have a 15-minute prep period and then 35 minutes to write that essay.
So I think these are some more kind of global strategies overall. Practice under time conditions. We've said that multiple times. We're not saying it to be annoying. We're saying it because it's important. Regularly take time practice tests to kind of build that muscle, right? It's muscle memory, making sure you know how quickly you need to move between questions, how long you can take on things. Time practice helps you just develop kind of that sense without having to constantly have an alarm or a clock or like constantly checking the time, calculating how many minutes you've spent on things. You need to kind of build that muscle memory yourself. Time benchmarks for each section, set target times for each section to ensure you stay on track. Make sure that you're breaking down the test into manageable kind of time segments so that you aren't spending too long on any one part. I actually had a couple colleagues at one point who had said that a practice strategy that they used because they had really struggled with the LSAT timing was to start actually building muscle memory for less time than the LSAT so that they could just really keep pushing their time and do it like on even more of a time crunch than they needed to because they just couldn't get under the time they needed. And that was kind of a strategy that they used to build their muscle memory and keep them moving faster. So the timing is just really important on the LSAT. Unfortunately, I don't know if folks felt like they had there were people who I have heard who like fell asleep in the ACT or the SAT and they were like, and I was able to finish. That's like not really a thing in the LSAT. I don't think that's really a thing in the ACT or SAT, but like it's really not a thing in the LSAT. Like you don't have time to snooze. So it really is just a kind of a sprint the whole time, unfortunately.
And we'll talk about some strategies to improve accuracy. And I actually think this sort of really directly does relate to the timing because I often get asked like what are some quick hacks to get faster at timing? You get better, you get more accurate, and you get stronger with the questions. That I think is like 90% of getting faster with it as well. Especially right if let's say you do a section in the 35 minutes. If you've missed, 7 questions in the first 15, what are we doing? Trying to get question 24 right? We need to get question 3 right. So really, it's important to make sure we're really looking for this perfect intersection of accuracy and speed. But if we have to pick one, it's accuracy, right? Because we don't get any, there's no participation trophy for completing all 25 questions. Unfortunately, I wish, right? It's hard enough, but we have to get the questions that we do correct, right? So our goal is to get through all these questions, but more importantly, get them correct or as many as possible. So double checking answers, reviewing answers if time permits. Very often time does not permit. I just typically try to suggest getting it right the first time. This is, again, why we just do a ton of practice. I still think, we obviously are aiming to have a little bit of buffer so that we're not like racing, towards the finish line. I find a good sweet spot to be like 1 or 2 minutes of extra time if possible. I find if sometimes people have way more than that, and it's typically because they rushed and made mistakes, and often I just find that tends to backfire. But it can be helpful. Sometimes there's that one pesky question where like you're so close, so you're like down between 2, and you just want a little bit of extra time to be able to go back to it. But I think really, again, this is why we do a ton of practice to root out the mistakes from the beginning. Avoiding common mistakes. So again, this is where that review comes in. When you're reviewing your incorrect questions, you want to understand, why the wrong answer is wrong, why the right answer is right. But really importantly, why did you get the question wrong, right? Paying attention to any sort of tendencies or bad habits or patterns that you notice when you miss questions, and just bringing more awareness to that so you can be mindful in future practice tests and future questions. Very common things. Misreading, that's like 90% of the issue oftentimes. I sometimes, I don't have them anymore because I've moved many times, but I used to have like my LSAT like paper test that I took. And there's so many of them where I'd go back to the old questions to review. And half of my like commentary is just like, read. Like if you just read, you would have gotten it right. And it's frustrating when you make the mistake. But, again, we just internalize that over time and we root it out. Overthinking it, staying focused on what they're asking, answering the right question, like knowing exactly what they're asking and not misreading that question. Very often, the LSAT can be petty sometimes. I've seen way too many questions where it's like half a word, and that makes or breaks the difference between a right or wrong answer. So it can be very nitpicky sometimes. Again, focusing on strengths. We want to, of course, celebrate and be proud of our strong points on the exam, but of course we can't ignore those weak spots either. I know personally when I took the LSAT, this is when the exam had logic games. I was pretty good at logic games. And I remember there was a phase where I would think to myself, oh, I missed one question on a logic game last week. I have to spend all week doing logic games, when really my poor reading comp was like drowning. And I have to do the reading comp and spend time doing that, and just being really honest with yourself on what it is that you need to improve on, and paying attention to that. It's not super intuitive because we as human beings like to do things we're good at and like to avoid things that we're not so good at, but that's the way we get better, right? Is addressing those weak spots.
So this is me. this slide is me. I was a ball of stress studying for the LSAT. It is very normal to be stressed. I will say that I think it is important to remember that your LSAT score does not define you, and your LSAT score is important. I am the first person to say, like, I can't lie and be like, oh, your LSAT score really doesn't matter. Your LSAT score matters, right? Like, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't, but it is just one part of your application, and lots of folks struggle with their LSAT, and it can be your weakest point, and you can still get into an excellent law school. And that's okay. I think the good thing to know is that when you go to law school, a lot of this tests will be similar to the LSAT, right? Like, they are testing on kind of similar things. A lot of schools say that your LSAT score is often indicative of how you'll do in your first year of law school. So slow down, take some time to take some deep breaths. You're building good strategies for studying in law school. You're building good strategies for, like, what are the best ways I study? What are my good study hours, right? Am I great at studying in the morning? Am I great at studying by myself? Am I great with flashcards? Am I great? Like, these are all really important things to learn about yourself. You will not do better by talking to yourself meanly, right? Like, you will not do better by being like, you're an idiot. Why did you do this on this? Like, why aren't you smarter? Why aren't you doing, like, do not let your anxiety get the best of you, and, like, allow yourself to, just, like, speak really negatively to yourself, or, like, kind of beat yourself down because of it. Cause it's not going to help you study any better. Your anxiety is not going to feel better. Nothing happy comes from that sort of situation. Right. So, kind of make friends with your test anxiety. Hello, test anxiety, name your test anxiety. And then just, like, pat it and be nice to it, and, like, let it calm down, and then keep going. Find ways to calm it down, taking deep breaths, yoga, playing video games, going on runs, like, healthy things, right? Not, like, mean things, like, healthy, nice things for your anxiety, because your anxiety will probably be there to hang out with you for maybe the rest of your life, and maybe until your LSAT is over. But either way, it's here for, like, a little while, and you just have to kind of find ways to navigate it.
And here's some specific techniques that can help. Number one, relaxation. I think just being able to manage that anxiety or often stress that comes with it. I'm not sure if this is meant, like, for the, okay, I'm guessing this is for the actual exam, not necessarily in preparation. Although it's really both, isn't it? Right. I actually think one of the best ways to manage that anxiety, because I want to distinguish, like, test anxiety and being nervous. Like, it's really natural to be nervous. Everyone is nervous. It's a high stakes exam, right? But it becomes a problem when that is, like, crippling test anxiety that's preventing you from, performing your best and what you're capable of. I think the number one thing that really helps with this is just waiting to take the exam until you're as prepared as possible. I think very often people rush into taking it prematurely. At the same time, like, you can be super, super prepared and still feel really nervous and just have, like, heart is beating really fast. And it often is a physical response sometimes. And so, of course, certain things that can help relax you, taking deep breaths, things to visualize. I'm more of a deep breath person than, like, a visualization person. But again, really whatever works for you. And this is something you can start practicing in your practice tests, right? When you're doing practice tests, do pay attention to if you notice yourself start to panic or feel stressed out or anxious, right? How can you practice working through that in those practice tests so that you have those tools ready to go for your actual exam? Mindset is super important. I think perspective is super helpful too. I'm definitely I'm probably, like, maybe a little bit the opposite of Tamar. I'm maybe not anxious enough about most things. I'm someone, if the world's spinning, I'm good. But I get stressed about really small, unimportant things. But I think, again, just being really positive in yourself and your capabilities. Again, I think this ties back into the practice that you do. If you continue to show up and are consistent with your practice, then when it comes time for the real exam, whatever the outcome, however it goes, you can look back and be like, hey, I did this. I did all this work. I showed up consistently. I put in the time. I put in the hours. Like look at me. It's awesome. And it's something to be really proud of. And that is the energy we want to carry into the test, rather than doubting ourselves and not feeling confident. And again, number 3 here is just sort of, this is what ties it all together, is again, just practicing being able to work through some of this stuff. I definitely, for me, I think I personally would get the most anxious in logic games, which are no longer on the exam anymore. Still, it's not like the other sections are chill by any means. And I noticed personally, again, if I felt really stuck on a question, it often would manifest pretty physically. I would get like sweaty, like hot, like my heart would beat fast. Like it was just, yeah, I could feel it start to sort of that stress or that anxiety start to come on. And so again, just being able to develop those tools to work through that, keep calm and carry on, right?
So just a few more things. I know we're kind of running on out of time, but staying present and avoiding distractions. I know it can be tempting to like keep your phone next to you while you're doing practice things, or kind of like just like go into it, leave your door open to your room, or whatever. Leave the TV on mute. Do not do those things. Make sure that you're like staying present, staying focused, putting distractions aside. Take mental breaks. Those are important. Make sure that you're doing things to regain focus. So whether that's like breathing, resetting your posture, like standing up every hour, I don't know, energy drinks. I'm sure I'm not supposed to be encouraging energy drinks. Whatever your thing is to regain focus, that is what you should do. And hopefully those things are healthy things.
Right. Here's some common mistakes. We've sort of touched on this a little bit in some of the past slides, so we won't spend too much time here. Again, just miscomprehension, misreading questions or instructions. Again, this is why we do a ton of practice. It should not be a surprise what they're asking you on the exam. And again, poor time management, perhaps spending too much time on questions that you're really struggling with that you might not get right anyway. If the way I like to think of it, right, if time is our scarce resource here, we want to allocate it towards the questions that are most likely to get us points, right? So just being strategic in that sense, and being mindful of the timing, but not in like a very debilitating, distracting way. And that's, again, as Tamar mentioned earlier, when you practice, you sort of get a sense internally, you sort of develop this like clock or this rhythm for how long a section is. I'm sure most LSAT test takers, once they're done with it, can probably measure pretty closely to 35 minutes, like if they just had to, or again, whatever time allocation you
have. So common mistake, I think this is the last common mistake we'll talk about. Even if you don't know the answer to the question, hopefully you've built enough skills at that point to make a good educated guess. So just skipping questions, not bubbling anything in, not great. Even if at the very end you have 5 questions left, you don't have time, make sure you bubble something in, and guessing without a strategy. I think after you've done enough studying, it is helpful to use whatever you can to kind of X out whatever is not a good answer, and then decide between those ones, right? Hopefully you've built enough muscle memory to be like, okay, I have a feeling between these ones and this one, this is what I'm thinking. These are the ways to think about it.
Yeah, I think we've touched on the next couple of slides are basically how to avoid these mistakes, and we discussed that. So I'm just going to keep moving on.
have.
Great.
Until we get to our review and recap, and then we'll get to our Q&A section. So Madeline, if you want to take away the review and recap, and then we'll go ahead to our Q&A section.
Yeah. So again, I think, pretty much everything we've said so far really comes down to the importance of studying proactively, consistently, effectively, having a plan, making it sustainable, sticking with it, and showing up. In your review, or not in your practice and in your review, developing the strategies and tools that work for you to be successful for logical reasoning, reading comprehension, and sure, the writing sample. And again, techniques to improve timing accuracy. All of these you get feedback on as you do practice, as you learn from your mistakes. And again, you see what works for you, what you need to do, what you need to improve on, and rinse and repeat and more practice tests.
Okay, so we've reached our Q&A section. We have 10 minutes left, so I'm hoping we'll be able to answer all of our questions because I see the chat box is popping. So if you want to book a free consultation, there's the QR code if you're interested in working with counselors like Madeline and Tamar. But I'll go ahead and just read out the questions and then you guys take it away. So I see a question from Ronique. I'm not really sure if this was kind of like before it started. The question is, if you've created an LSAC profile, do you merge this information? I'm wondering if maybe you can provide a little bit more context on what you mean, Ronique, if you're still on the call, and then we'll come back to you afterwards. Next question, is the LSAT just a matter of exposing yourself to as many question types as possible?
I'll take this one. I would say, yes, not necessarily question types, but just sheer questions, sheer volume. I sort of my refrain with the LSAT is the more you see, the less surprised you'll be, right? Even though there are, again, a variety of different question types and we want to be familiar with the fundamentals of them and what they're asking and strategies for them, within each question type, there are many variations in terms of what they do, in difficulty. You can have any type of question can be easy or hard on the LSAT. Nothing is safe, right? And so again, the more questions you see, I almost sort of say, like, we want to make as many mistakes as possible in our practice, so then we can see like exactly what kind of get in the heads of the test makers a little bit and see what they're doing to try to trick us. And yeah, maybe we'll fall for some of those traps a few times. But again, each time it's like that phrase, you know, what is it? Fall 10 times, get up 11, right? And we come back to it. And again, just really exposing yourself to not just the question types, but just the sheer questions, as many as possible.
Awesome. Thank you. Ronique, I see you raising your hand. Could you just add more clarification by typing in the chat box, and then we will get to your question. Next question is from Colin. Are old prep books within 1 to 3 years ago still useful for prep? I know they took out a section of the LSAT and was wondering if they changed the remaining 2 sections a lot.
I can probably answer this one too. I'm pretty familiar with the books. It really depends on the book. I would probably say yes, though. The logic games section is no longer on the exam, but the other sections have not changed. Like they have been the same since like 1991. Like they're not changing. They're older than me. So I think if you have, let's say, for example, a book that comes to mind is the Power Score Bibles. Those are pretty commonly used. I have a 2020 edition. I still have it. People will ask me, because that's when I took the test, right? So it made sense that I had it then, but I still reuse it. I still refer to it. People will ask me like, oh, I have that edition. Is that fine? Yeah, it's fine. It's the same. They don't really change it much from year to year. I can't necessarily speak to other books or other editions, but from what I would imagine, if you have any, I would say any edition within like the past 5 or even 10 years, it's probably safe. Just obviously know that there's no logic games. The exam also didn't used to be digital, so that's different. Just ignore the stuff that's not applicable, but otherwise it's fine.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, Ronique, I see your question. I've created an LSAC profile. If I want to work with jurists, do I merge what's already with LSAC? Assuming like your personal statements or something like that, like all your information with LSAC, I would assume yes. But if someone wants to correct me.
I'll jump in. We don't have access to your LSAC. We are happy to provide kind of guidance on if you have questions about LSAC things, but we will work kind of either in Google Docs or Microsoft Word to help you like write personal statements and diversity statements and school specific statements and those sorts of things. But we will never have access to your LSAC. That's yours. It has a password. We shouldn't have your password. No one should have your password. And you will do all of the LSAC things on your own. We will help get the elements ready to put on there, but you are kind of in charge of getting it in there and submitting everything.
Okay, thank you. Question from Austin. Do you recommend doing all the easy questions first, then returning to the difficult ones for the remainder of the exam?
I will say absolutely not, but this is probably a personal preference one. And Madeline, I'm sure you have more experience with this than I do.
So sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say no. Like this would that strategy would stress me out so badly, and I feel like my brain would start spinning and being like, "Oh my god, all the hard ones! I'm like losing all my strategies that I've worked so hard to gain. I don't know what to do." And like absolute panic would ensue. So I would not be able to do that. But there might be some testers who could manage that and be totally fine.
I would say, I mean, especially at least for logical reasoning, the questions do just kind of naturally get more difficult. You often don't know if a question is easy or difficult until you're like in it and you're like, oh, well, this is hard now. So I think it's kind of, there's not really a point to try to like sniff out like the easier, tough questions. I personally am very much just like a do them in order, and again, just do your best to get them right. If you feel really stuck on a question and it's giving you a hard time, then maybe it means, we flag it and come back to it. But I know at least personally, I typically just try to do them in order. If you're really struggling to have enough time to get to most of the harder ones, it means you just need to keep practicing and you're not ready to take the exam. That's the way I think of it, just to sort of simplify it. I'm a big fan of like fighting for simplicity with the exam in general.
Okay, awesome. Another question from Austin. I'm starting to study for the LSAT this week. Can Juris help me obtain a 165 score if I want to apply during this admission cycle? I would say yes, but it also depends on the work that you put in as well. It's obviously a lot of work to study for this exam, and there's no 100% guarantee. So it really depends on your ability to really put in the work as well and work with Juris education counselors.
The only other thing I'll say, Austin, is that law school admissions, unlike undergrad admissions, are unfortunately rolling. So you have the best shot of getting in the earlier you apply in the cycle. So that means there are more spots for you to get in. If you apply September 1, there are fewer spots for every day you don't apply. That means that you can still get in January, you can still get in February, you can still get in possibly if you apply on the very last day. There are just fewer spots because they've already been giving spots away. So if you don't have an LSAT score yet and you are thinking about studying for 3 to 6 months, your application just won't be ready for review until after the holidays, and at that point it's getting to be on the later side of the cycle. So I know lots of people who wait until the following cycle to apply in the September-October sweet spot, so they'll have the best shot at having at getting in. So that's just something that you might consider depending on how long you think you'll need to study.
Okay, amazing, thank you. Okay, we have 2 questions from Aruna. This might be a silly question, no such thing. But is the LSAT on paper? And if so, are we permitted to bring highlighters? And the second question is, how do you recommend staying motivated in studying?
Yeah, I'll answer this one. So it's not on paper, actually. The exam is digital. So you can either take it remote or in person. Either variation, it's still done digitally. There is a digital highlighter. So if you want to highlight, you can highlight it digitally. Now, many takers have what are called testing accommodations, such as extra time, stop, start breaks. These are things that can get approved by LSAC if you typically have like a demonstrated need for them. An accommodation that can be requested for if you have demonstrated need is taking a paper exam. But the default is digital. I took the exam digitally. I actually practiced on paper, which is kind of neither here nor there. But again, they do have like a highlighting tool and underline tool on the digital platform. Now, for staying motivated, everyone's really different with this. For me, this is going to sound a little bit cheesy, but I really recommend really embracing the process and almost like falling in love with the process of the LSAT. Tomorrow's probably like, no, like never. But I'm someone who really likes the exam, and I sort of liked the routine of practicing it and got a lot out of it. Everyone's different with that. That might not work for some people. I also think something else that can help too is just really focusing on the bigger picture. The LSAT's just a means to an end, right? It's a means to get into law school, which itself is a means to an end, right? To practice law, to become an attorney, whatever it is you want to do, right? So really thinking about what is pushing you to do this, what is, where do you hope to be on the other side of this, both in law school and beyond? I think really focusing on that why can then make it easier to zoom in on the day-to-day and what you need to do to get there.
Amazing. And unfortunately, that marks all the time that we have for this webinar. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. Like Tamar mentioned in the chat, If you have any questions, feel free to just schedule a free consultation and someone will be able to answer those questions for you and give you that one-on-one attention for everything that you need to know about law school and preparing for the LSAT. I want to thank you all again for joining us. Thank you, Tamar. Thank you, Madeline. You guys were absolutely wonderful. And we will see you guys for the next Juris Education webinar. Take care and have a great night.